So my purpose tonight is to walk you through some of the key elements of the local control funding formula. And we've got a bunch of slides, but I don't want to spend a lot of time on the slides. Some of you have seen some of them before, but I want to spend some time talking about your district, your options, governance by your board, choices that you'll need to make, when you get to make them, all of those kinds of things. And more importantly, I'd like to take as many questions as we can get in. So let me just start off by saying that I've been with your district in a variety of capacities for about 15 years. And at the time in 2004 that your district was going through a financial crisis, a lot of that was caused by what we're going to talk about tonight, by the state giving you more than a third of your money in little buckets that you could not get to. And so here you have needs, but you can't get to all of your money. And the governor's intention is that you will have access to all of your money to address all of your needs. And how well that works out remains to be seen, but that is the intention. So this is as much an exercise in democracy as it is in funding for California schools. This is about who has control. Back in 2004, I remember talking with board members then who said, we have no local control. The money comes to us and we are required to administer state programs in a certain way in order to get that money, and we're just sitting here administering state programs. When do we get to say what we want for the students of Oakland? Well, it's been a long time, but this is a year that you get to start saying what you want for the students of Oakland. So let me just pop through a couple of slides here and see if this thing works now. Whoops, I went too fast. Okay, there we are. Okay, so for board members, I hope you can all see our famous alligator chart. And the alligator chart is a chart that we have used for the last several years during the recession, and the blue line at the top is where we would be funded if we had received all of the cost of living adjustments since 2007-8. The number for 2007-8 is your number for the base revenue limit back then, and the straight line across the chart is what would have happened if you had level funding during that period, and the bottom line, the green one, is what you actually got. So you can see that you've had a substantial cut every year since 2007-8. This year, those red lines are really important. This year, for the first time in 5 years, the state is adding money for schools. And we're getting the first new dollars we've gotten in 5 years. And some districts under the new formula are getting a little bit, and that's that line that's marked low. And that's the district with 0 students that are eligible under the new formula for the local control funding formula supplements. The high district is the one with 100%. 100%. The medium is the average, the statewide average. And then we have where Oakland would have been under the old formula. Okay, and so under the old formula, you would have gotten $5,522 below the medium, below the statewide average, if the state had distributed the money based on the old formula. But under the new formula, you're going to do a lot better than that, and I'll show you how well you're going to do. So the new formula was a good thing for Oakland, and that's what that chart means to say. But even after the new formula, you'll still be well below where you were in 2007-8. Okay? All right, so we have Prop 30. Prop 30 guaranteed no more cuts, but it didn't provide any additional money for schools. Prop 30 goes away over the next 6 years, so the sales tax goes away, then the income tax goes away, and the state will have to make up that $6 billion some other way, okay? So how well will we do in the future? Prop 98 goes up every year. These forecasts for Prop 98 we think are good forecasts. We think that the state will have the wherewithal to fund public education if it has the will. 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said that if Prop 98 goes up and the state has the money, schools will get that money. Over the last 5 years, we've seen that Nothing could be further from the truth. Prop 98 has gone up nearly every year for the last 5 years, and we've gotten cuts in the face of growth in Prop 98. So over the next few years, we say the state will have the money, and we hope they pass it on to schools. And the governor's very much committed to his new formula, so I think at least for the next couple of years, we can count on that. Okay, so the way the new formula works, we have a grant per student, and it's grade level by grade level. And then above that, for every student that qualifies as either an English language learner, free and reduced price lunch, or a foster child, you get a 20% supplement. And for your district, because you have nearly 80% of your students that qualify, for every student above 55%, you not only get the 20%, you get an additional 50%. So you get a 70% premium for about 25% of your students, the ones that are over 55%. So you get the supplement, 20%, the concentration grant, 50%. So you do much better under this formula. And so we've shown the numbers that you actually receive by grade level. When we look at the minimums, the grant amounts, so if we had nobody that was eligible, the numbers are really small. The maximum grant that somebody gets is a lot bigger, and then you get the supplemental and the concentration grants off of that. So that's how it works. So when you look at Oakland, I said you had nearly 80%. So let me tell you how to read the chart. You start on the left-hand side, and this is the district with 0 students, and it's by grade level. So each of those colored lines represents a grade level. We come across to where you are. You're 80%. So you can see where you are on the slope of that line. You're up over the 11,000 mark, up around 11,500. That is your goal for 2021. Okay, now I want to let that sink in for a minute. The cuts were made in 2008-9. So 7-8 was our high water mark. That's the most you ever got, was 2007-8. And by 2020-21, you would be on, if the governor's plan works, you'll be on that line. That means that by 2021, you will be back to 46th in the nation. This is, I mean, you know, I get called to the woodshed at the Capitol every now and then because of some of the things that I say. And one of the things that I said when the governor first came out with his new formula was, this formula will not matter if we remain last in the nation in per student funding. And if this formula is going to work, you got to add money and stir. We've got to have a lot more money going into public education. We are owed $9 billion. We're getting $2 billion this year, right? We're owed 9. It takes 15 to catch up with the national average, and we're getting 2. I mean, we got a long ways to go before California students are on a par. Okay, let me keep going. It's getting dark outside, and I don't want to take up all of your meeting time. So what this chart shows, again, the low district ends up with $8,000 in 2021. The medium district, $9,100, but you're one of the high districts. You're up over $11,000 by 2021. But between now and then, what that means is you're going to get a bigger increase every year than the districts that have fewer qualifying students than you do. So this is all about numbers of qualified students. You have a lot. Statewide average is 60%. Not many districts are 80% or more, but you are. Okay? So let's take a look at the base grant. You're going to get a base grant. What can you use the base grant for? The base grant is not like the old revenue limit, but it's kind of like the old revenue limit. But it has some things in it that the revenue limit didn't have. Class size reduction money is in the base for the qualifying grades. The deferred maintenance money is in the base. So it's a little bit different, but you can kind of think of increases in the base grant as being discretionary money that the board could use for general purpose. Then we get the total funding line. And that total funding line for the average district is shown there. And the difference between the two lines is that supplemental grant and concentration grant. And most districts only get a little tiny bit of the concentration grant if they get any at all. Here's that low district, there's that high district. So the premium goes to the districts that have a lot of qualifying students like you have. We have some districts that are getting $40 as an increase, and then we have some districts that are getting $500 for this year, and you're up close to the 500 mark. Okay, so now we look at what are the limitations on what the state does. Prop 98 is still in place. Prop 98 says we get a certain percentage of the state budget unless the state manipulates it and cheats us again. And so if the state doesn't do that, then Prop 98 would still define the amount of money the state owes schools, and the state would have to provide that. And I showed you the chart on Prop 98. There's more than enough to make the governor's plan as long as they don't cheat us out of Prop 98 money again. So there's some danger for your district in this chart. And I know some of you have seen this chart before. For the district that's getting $20 or $30 or $40 a year, if the state fails to fund the program, they fall, but not very far. But for you, you're up there on that high line, and if you plan for that money and you don't get it, it's a long way down. And so you have some increased risk from the fact that you are projecting a lot more money than others. So we say that the district that's low falls off the curb if the state doesn't fund the program, but if you fall off a 10-story building if the state doesn't fund the program. So there's a lot more risk, and you've got to be a lot more careful. You also have Common Core funding coming to you, and it's on top of the money from the local control funding formula. You can spend it on three things. You can spend it on staff development, materials, and technology. Those are the three broad categories. Have to have a plan before you can do that. You've got to spend it over the next couple of years, but that's additional money. Your district is one of those districts where the governor would hope there would be an immediate impact from the infusion of cash after all these years without any increases. You've had no increases for 5 years. You've had to pay increases in health benefits. You've had to pay step and column for employees. You have had to pay higher fuel bills, facility costs, all of those kinds of things, and you've had no new dollars. Now you've got some new dollars. The governor is hopeful that they will get spent, but he's left some unanswered questions about spending those dollars. So we're going to need to talk about those a little bit. So that money for the Common Core is about $200 per student. That's on top of the increase that you get in your general fund. And as I said, you've got two years, but don't spend it on anything that's ongoing, because if it's something that eats, the second year you won't be able to feed it. Okay, so when we look at this chart is uniquely Oakland. This is not a statewide average or anything like that. So if you were to go across the top line of the funding line, in 2012-13, all sources, categoricals and the base revenue limit, you got about $7,140. For 13-14, the year that we're in now, you have an increase of just under 400 bucks. Just under 400. And that's not a huge increase, but when you've had zeros, that's a lot more than we've been getting, and then you have the Common Core on top of that. Look at your 14-15 number. You go up another $500. Look at your 15-16 number. You go up another $500. See how the formula is moving you ahead as and it compounds, because the supplements are percentages of the base, and if the base goes up, all the supplements go up. So it compounds over time. Your increases get bigger over time. The blue line on the chart is the governor's line, and that's the line that you would get if the governor meets his funding targets. The line below that is what we call the school services planning line. It says that somewhere over the course of this implementation, there are going to be years where we have a recession, where the state doesn't put up the money. I mean, we've had 4 years since the recession was declared to be over. I know it doesn't feel like it's been over 4 years, but in June of 2009, the feds said the recession is over. So we've already had 4 years, and the governor's counting on 8 more. Well, there's never been a 12-year period where California didn't have a recession or two. So we're going to need to plan for that. So we say to your financial people, make a plan for the bottom line, for the lower line, and then each year ratchet that plan up when the state actually performs. So when they promise to perform, we give them some credit. When they actually perform, we give them the rest of the credit. So your district does really well. You're getting over 5% this year, and then the 1.74 and 2.21, that's our planning line. If the state comes through with the top line, you get over 5% in all those years. Okay? So let me keep going. All right, so I want to move from money to accountability. So what we have is we have this situation now where the state has given us really sketchy guidance. And the state board in its meeting last week, the state board members said, we think the law is clear, districts should just follow the law. But it isn't clear. And it isn't clear, and it's recognized in law that it's not clear, because it says in law that the state board will put forth regulations that interpret the law, and that will determine how you can spend the money. Let me just explain that in very clear terms. In January, when the governor proposed this formula, January of this year, the governor said, I'm going to give the money to the Oakland School Board. They will be bound by their own local plan and by federal law. There will be no state intervention in any of the programs. You get the money, you make a plan, you decide what's best for your kids, you spend the money. That's Governor Brown in January. In May, Governor Brown amends his proposal because he's not getting good support in the legislature. And his proposal in May is, we're going to button this money up tighter than the old categoricals. And so you can't spend this money on anything. You have to maintain all the existing programs. And so now we come to June and the budget adoption. So now the governor's been, you can spend it all, you can't spend any of it. And he can't get agreement in the legislature. So what does he do? To get it out of the way of the local control funding formula, he puts into the law that the state board will decide next year. So the state board will decide in the spring the regulations that apply to what you are doing now. So this is, you know, some things never change. The state expects you to act now. And it would be like, you know, telling me when I go back to Sacramento tonight, you drive down that freeway and tomorrow we'll put up the speed limit signs and mail you the tickets, right? And it's kind of like that. And that's a way you should think about it. So we're encouraging you to be really cautious right now as you develop that plan. There are some things that I'll talk about that you should be doing, but I just want the board to know that some caution is required because we do not know the rules. Okay, and it's been my pleasure to work with Vernon Howell for a long time, and so when in doubt, if you do what Vernon says, you'll probably be okay. All right, so as we go through that plan, the plan has to be linked to the budget. So next June, when your staff brings your budget to you, what they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, here's our budget, and here's our local control accountability plan. And in the plan, if we said we're going to spend money on third grade intervention, in the budget, we've got money for third grade intervention. And so they're supposed to match up. There's a process for ensuring that that happens. There's a process if you don't meet your accountability plan for some interventions from the state. We're not sure what that will look like, but right now we know that you're going to need to engage in some consultation with stakeholders, and we think you can start that now. You're going to have, now this is the governor in May, was saying, here's a list of people, you have to consult with them, you have to receive written comments, you have to have a public hearing, you have to consider their comments. In January, it was go talk to the stakeholders and then the board decides. But by May, there's a lot more formal process. There's this opportunity for public input. This is the last proposal that the governor made. Now, all of you know the governor is the mayor of Oakland, and some of you will recall that when this district was going through the financial crisis, he was the mayor of Oakland, and that he was involved in some of the steps that were taken, good and bad, to help the district and to try to resolve things. But we all know that he's a master politician, right? And so the governor says to the legislature in June, we can't decide together on these rules, so let's pass it to an independent body. What would the independent body be? Well, how about the state board? That sounds really good. Who appoints the members of the state board? The governor, okay? So the governor basically says, put it in my home court and we'll decide later. So the reason I rely on these things, this is the last statements from the governor. So what instructions has he given the state board? Now, when we talk to the state board, they say we're going to be very liberal in our interpretations of the rules. We want the local boards to have some authority. The state has said that every year for many years. They've never once meant it, and I don't think they believe in local control now. So anybody but the governor. I think the governor does, but I don't think he's got a lot of support. Okay, so we look at the timelines. By the 1st of January, the state board is supposed to adopt new budget standards and criteria. By the end of January, some spending regulations. By the end of March, this is the guidance for the plan that you're going to be creating now that you have to adopt in June. Right, everybody still with me? This thing's moving really fast, and you're running a school this year. You're spending money under a plan that doesn't exist. And then by October of 15, we have these technical assistance rules. Now, some of you may recall that I was a career Air Force officer, and I worked for the Inspector General of the Air Force. And when I walked into the wing commander's office at 5 o'clock in the morning and I said, "Colonel, we are here to help you." And he turned to me and said, "Colonel, we are glad to see you." Those were the two biggest lies ever told. Okay, now, when these people come in to help you, and you welcome them, some of you remember what state help looks like, right? Anybody remember that? Anyway, okay, all right. So I wanted to remind you of that. Okay, so that concludes the presentation, and we can turn this thing off, and we can get to the part that I came for, and that is to answer your questions about the local control. Let me just make one other comment, and then I'll take those questions. First, this is a tremendous opportunity for this school board. There isn't a school board in the state that knows more about accountability and about what happens when things go right and what happens when things go wrong than you do. And there have been consequences for decisions. A lot of our society, people make decisions and they commit acts and there are no consequences. But in this district, there have been consequences, and you've worked your way through them, and you've come from a troubled system to a system that I think is improving in a lot of ways. One thing that you did in order to do that is you have this RBB system, and the RBB system of budgeting is going to cause you to have to rethink some things. And let me just explain. You're going to get more money out of this formula. If you use your normal practices, most of that money will end up at school sites. When that money ends up at school sites and the board decides we want to do something simple, we want to lower class sizes across the district, you won't have any money to do that. If the board decides we want to give a pay raise, you won't have any money to do that. So you're going to have to kind of think about which pots of money, the base grant, the supplement, the concentration grant, are going to be used for the benefit across the district, and the board's going to have to hold on to that. And then what's going to be used at the individual sites. The basic guidelines from the state are that the money that you get out of the supplemental and concentration grants has to be used primarily for the benefit of the students who generated it. But when you're 80%, that's all of them. So you're going to have much wider latitude in how to use the money than other districts will have. But because of your internal budgeting system, you're going to have to rethink how you distribute that money, and I think that that's a topic you're going to want to spend some time with, because the system you have right now isn't geared to the new state financial system. So I think your planning process, and that's one of the things I was asked to talk about, has to change a little bit. And I'm not saying what you've done is not a good process. It's worked really well under the old system, but the new system is different. And you could end up with a situation where the board wants to do something or is required by the state to do something across the district, and the money's already out at the sites, and now you can't do that. So I'm not saying you have to start over, but I do think you have to rethink how you're going to achieve those district-wide objectives.